Hi, my name is Tina. Right now, as the sleepless lights of Manhattan pulse beyond the glass wall of my office at Goldman Sachs, and I approach the age of 29, my life resembles a perfectly polished diamond, its weight and facets in ideal balance. But it wasn't always this way. Let me go back to the origins of this story, for its roots lie in that deaf, cold soil where I, an unwanted sprout, fought my way towards the light in the shadow of large family trees. My family treated me like a spare part, a functional and misplaced accessory, remembered only in case of dire need. I was born the fourth child, by which time my parents' enthusiasm and the strength of my ancestors had been irrevocably spent on three older heirs. Marcus and Jake, the boys crowning the family pyramid, and Sarah, the long-awaited daughter. They formed the perfect picture for which this entire family enterprise had been undertaken. By the time I was born, they had practically put a final full stop on all parental duties, having exhausted not only their financial, but far more importantly, their emotional resources. You know how in some families the last child gets spoiled with everyone's attention? Well, that was decidedly not me. I invariably got the scraps of everything in our house. When Marcus, the athlete and ringleader, needed a new sports uniform, he got it, smelling of fresh fabric and opportunity. When Jake, the diligent student, needed a powerful laptop for programming, it appeared on his desk as if by magic. Sarah wanted to immerse herself in the elegant world of ballet. Of course, our princess. Her feet were clad in pointe shoes, while mine clattered in shoes I had long outgrown. Not just physically, but metaphorically. But when it was my turn, the same tedious chorus would sound. Here's Marcus's old jacket. It still fits perfectly. Or, you can use Sarah's phone. Look, it works. The screen is just a bit cracked. There were 3 cracks, and each one reminded me of my position in this family hierarchy. Yet worse than the old things was not their physical condition, but what they symbolized, a complete lack of attention. When Marcus triumphantly made the university football team, it was celebrated with a grand party. A huge cake was ordered, all the relatives were gathered, and his photo in a victorious pose took a place of honor on the mantelpiece. The same story repeated when Jake, to everyone's joy, was accepted into his dream college. And when Sarah's fragile, delicate drawings were displayed at a local art exhibition, my parents invited the entire extended family to admire her talent. And me? At 15, after passing the most difficult stages, I won a state math competition. You know what my parents said? "Oh, how nice. Honey," my mother addressed me, "could you help your sister with her algebra homework? She's struggling again." By the age of 16, I understood the rules of this family game with cold, crystalline clarity. No one was going to offer me a hand. No one was going to throw me a lifeline in this indifferent sea. If I wanted to achieve anything, I had to start procuring everything myself. Right after school, I got a job at a local grocery store. Minimum wage, smelling of wet floors and old cardboard. But it was my hard-earned money. The first major purchase I saved up for over several months was a phone. Not some fancy iPhone, just a regular but new and fully functional smartphone whose screen wasn't webbed with a spiderweb of cracks like Sarah's old one. My parents merely nodded approvingly. "Look, our Tina is so independent," they boasted to acquaintances. "She's very mature for her age." And translated from their language, that meant only one thing. Thank God we don't have to worry about her anymore. When I turned 18 and was preparing for high school graduation, I already knew exactly what future awaited me. Marcus's college tuition was fully paid for. Jake's too. Sarah, who was only a year older, also got her full package. But when I sat down with my parents for negotiations to discuss my plans, they dropped the very bomb whose explosion I had sensed coming all these years. "Tina, honey," my father began, looking somewhere past me, "we need to be completely honest with you. We've already sent 3 children to college. We simply don't have the financial means to do it again." I wasn't even surprised. I had methodically saved every penny earned at the grocery store, for I had seen this blow coming from miles away. But Despite all my preparation, it was wildly painful, especially because they spoke about it as if it were some natural disaster that had befallen them from outside, not their own, albeit unspoken, choice. This icy parental candor hung in the air, but then, like a sweet syrup, came a belated consolation. "But don't worry," my mother added, and her voice held notes of that cheap, perfunctory support that only burns the wound more. "You're so smart and hardworking. I'm sure you'll figure something out." "Yes, thanks for the trust, Mom," I replied, my words flat, devoid of all emotion, concealing a storm of bitter sarcasm. So, I pushed myself to the limit during my final year, squeezing myself dry. My grades already at a decent level, I drove to brilliant heights, turning every test into a battle for my future. I joined every club whose name would look impressive on a scholarship application, from debate to economic modeling. I volunteered at an animal shelter, spending weekends among abandoned dogs, and tutored math to underprivileged kids from disadvantaged neighborhoods, imparting to them the knowledge that was taken for granted in my own family. Essentially, I forged myself into the perfect, polished candidate, a living illustration of the word self-reliance. And this titanic effort, for the most part, worked. I managed to snag a 70% scholarship to a local state university for their business program. It was a victory, hard won, but it turned out to be Pyrrhic. There was still 30% of the tuition left, plus room and board, plus books, plus all those countless minor expenses that devour a student's budget. The numbers in my cherished notebook, filled with calculations, stubbornly didn't add up, even with all my night shifts at the deli. That's when, gritting my teeth and stepping over my pride, I dialed Aunt Linda's number. She, my father's sister, had always existed in our family system as a sort of foreign element, a woman with a different outlook on life. Linda had no children of her own, but had built a brilliant career, holding a high marketing specialist position at a solid company and living in a cozy, beautifully furnished house about an hour's drive from us. "Aunt Linda," I said as soon as she picked up, my voice trembling, "I need to ask for your help with something very important, and I'll understand if you say no." I explained the whole situation without embellishment, the scholarship, the remaining costs, my parents' polite but firm refusal. I told her I would pay back every penny as soon as I could, with interest if she wished. Linda was silent for a long time, and I was preparing to hear a polite refusal. But then her voice, warm and firm, sounded through the receiver. "Tina, I've seen all my life how your parents treated you as an afterthought. Of course I'll help you, and you don't need to pay me back right now. Focus on your studies." I broke down and cried right there on the phone, sobs choking me, a mixture of incredible relief and accumulated pain. Finally, someone in my family had seen me and supported me unconditionally. But even this bright, fragile moment was ruthlessly spoiled. Elated, I ran downstairs to share the news with my parents, shouting from the doorway, "I sorted it out! I have the money for college!" They were standing in the kitchen next to Marcus, who had recently graduated from his expensive private college. And in the driveway, its lacquered body gleaming, stood a brand new Honda Civic with a huge red bow on the hood. "Congratulations, son," my father's voice boomed, full of genuine pride. "You've earned it." Marcus was grinning like an idiot, posing for photos next to his new treasure, and I stood in the doorway with my victory, which suddenly seemed to dim, thinking, hey, I just secured funding for my entire education. But no one was listening. And then I had a probably completely stupid and naive idea. But I was 18 and feeling a surge of desperate courage. "Hey, Marcus," I said, stepping closer, "since you have a new car now, can I have your old one? It would really help me get to campus." Marcus looked at me as if I'd asked him to donate a kidney. "Are you serious?" he snorted. "I'm going to sell that car and use the money for a down payment on an apartment. Why would I just give it to you?" "Because I'm your sister," I said quietly, but insistently, "and I helped you with your economics homework for about 2 years straight while you kept failing your exams." He actually laughed in my face. "Tina, you can take the bus like every other normal college student. It'll be good for you to endure a little hardship." And my parents, standing nearby, nodded in unison, as if his words contained an immutable truth. "He's right, honey," my mother echoed him. "Public transportation builds character." That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep, and the same thought circled obsessively in my head, sharp as a blade. My parents had just spent probably $20,000 on a brand new car for Marcus, a man with a diploma and a stable job, while preaching to me, their minor daughter just starting out, about building character through bus rides. In that moment, something inside me finally snapped and turned to stone. I no longer expected anything from them. Not help, not support, not simple human fairness. From that point on, I truly and completely was on my own. College turned out to be the harsh trial I expected. I worked hard while my classmates received generous financial and moral support from their families. To save every penny, I continued living in my parents' house, which meant exhausting daily commutes on 2 buses to get to campus. The one-way trip took at least an hour, but I accepted it and even found a special, stoic rhythm in it. I was good at bringing order to chaos, structuring my life with maximum efficiency. I immersed myself in business studies, focusing on investment management, a field where cold calculation and discipline were rewarded. To pay for expensive books and supplies, I got a job at a small, cozy coffee shop right near campus. The manager, Tony, was a man tired of life. Not young, but with a surprisingly kind heart, and he genuinely cared about his employees. He flexibly adjusted the schedule to fit my lecture timetable and allowed me to study at a corner table during slow periods. Sometimes, bringing me a cup of hot cocoa, he would look over my shoulder and help me figure out particularly difficult finance problems. It turned out that before buying this coffee shop and leaving the hustle, he himself had worked for 2 decades in a major bank. "You're going to go far, Tina," he often told me, looking at me with his perceptive, tired eyes. "I can see it. You have that hunger, that inner fire." And he was absolutely right about the hunger. While my classmates partied on weekends, I was either behind the counter or poring over notes in the library. I had no time for the carefree student life everyone talked about so rapturously. I had goals. Meanwhile, at home, the family atmosphere became even more unbearably strange and stifling. Marcus married his college girlfriend right after graduation. Of course, my parents threw them a lavish, expensive wedding, paying for every cent. Then, Jake decided he wanted to move in with his girlfriend, and my parents not only helped him find a nice apartment, but happily bought him all new furniture. Next, Sarah moved out, with the same full financial and organizational support. But here was the most painful paradox. Even though Marcus, Jake, and Sarah had long since settled into their own lives, they were literally constantly at our parents' house. Family dinners every Sunday, random visits on weekday evenings, endless holiday celebrations. And every time they crossed the threshold, my parents would literally light up like a Christmas tree. And I would hear my mother, hugging them, say breathlessly, "Our favorite children are here." She said it literally, seeing nothing in me but an empty space. I sat at the same kitchen table, doing homework on complex financial models, while she dropped such phrases as if I were a ghost, an invisible entity with no voice or right to exist in their perfect family picture. And then came the day of my own victory, graduation day. I had endured all 4 years, graduated with honors, was top of my class, and had already signed a contract with Goldman Sachs. As I walked across the stage to receive my well-earned diploma, my parents in the front row clapped politely and restrainedly, with an air as if they were attending the graduation of some stranger's children. 2 weeks later, they invited me for a so-called family council. "Tina," my father began, avoiding my gaze, "you're 22 now. We think it's time for you to find your own place." A heavy pause hung in the air. "But Marcus lived here until he was 24, I objected, quietly but clearly. "Jake lived here until 23. Sarah only moved out last year." "You've always been more mature," my mother immediately parried, her voice sounding saccharine and false. "More self-sufficient." I heard the subtext of that statement perfectly. We never cared for you properly, and now we are officially relieving ourselves of this burden. I was given 2 weeks to find something and move out. I found a tiny studio apartment on the other, cheapest end of town. On the day of my move, only I and the driver of a cheap rented truck were outside. My parents didn't even come out to help carry my modest belongings, let alone ask what address their daughter would be living at from then on. And so, I moved into my tiny but own studio apartment and began my real adult life in complete solitude, as it had essentially always been. The walls, painted a nondescript beige, became silent witnesses to my morning coffee and late-night report sessions. I learned to pay bills, fix broken appliances, and enjoy the silence, which, unlike the family silence, was calm and healing. But this is where everything became truly tangled and paradoxical. After I moved out, my parents, as if following some unspoken pactum subjectionis, once and for all stopped inviting me to any family events. Thanksgiving, Christmas with its shimmering lights, Easter, even birthdays, no longer existed for me. Meanwhile, Marcus, Jake, and Sarah were invariably present at every holiday, generously posting happy, shining family photos on social media where everyone was gathered. On my first Thanksgiving in exile, I sat on my sofa bed eating bland Chinese takeout while scrolling through my Instagram feed, where my siblings were showcasing a turkey drenched in gravy and the general merriment I wasn't allowed to witness. This quiet, digital torture hurt more than I could have anticipated. So the next year, driven by a mixture of resentment and a smoldering hope, I decided to take the initiative. On Thanksgiving, I bought an exquisite pumpkin pie from an expensive bakery and drove in my own, no longer rented, car to my parents' house. When I entered, the searingly familiar smell of roasted turkey hit my nose. Everyone was already there. Marcus with his wife, Jake with his long-term girlfriend, Sarah with her new beau, my parents. They were all sitting at the large polished table, and their united laughter stopped the moment I crossed the threshold. A heavy, deafening silence fell. "Oh, Tina," my mother finally said, and her voice held not joy, but only vexed surprise. "We weren't expecting you." "I brought a pie," I said, lifting my trophy box, feeling like a ridiculous quartermaster in someone else's war. "That's great," my father said dryly, nodding towards the sideboard where I placed my offering. I found a free chair and sat down at the table, with a persistent feeling that I was a ghost, an invisible presence disrupting the idyll. They all continued talking animatedly, but now their conversation flowed like a river around an inconvenient rock. They talked about Marcus's new promotion, the master's program Jake had been accepted into, Sarah's latest art exhibition. When someone's gaze accidentally fell on me, it resulted in a short, falsely polite remark, as if I were a neighbor who had dropped by for a minute. "So, Tina," Sarah said with a strained, perfunctory smile, "how do you like your little apartment?" "It's fine," I replied. "Still taking the bus everywhere?" Jake chimed in, and Marcus snorted, suppressing a laugh. My parents, meanwhile, just sat and watched, not attempting to intervene or stop this awkward farce. After dinner, driven by remnants of automatic politeness, I helped clear the table, said goodbye, and left. No one tried to stop me, asked when we would see each other again, or offered me leftovers from the pie. That was the last time I showed up anywhere uninvited. And you know what? After that, they never once called to ask how I was. Not a single call. I didn't call them either. We all just stopped, like a broken mechanism, and silence became our only common language. The years passed. I threw myself into work, got 2 rapid promotions, and finally, with a feeling of deep, triumphant satisfaction, paid back Aunt Linda every invested penny, plus generous interest. I bought myself a car, not just a means of transportation, but a luxurious Rolls-Royce Spectre, a silent and powerful symbol of my success, housed in a garage that cost over $250,000. I got a mortgage on a spacious, bright apartment in the very center of the city with a dizzying view of the nightlights. I traveled around Europe twice, wandering through the Louvres and dining at Michelin-starred restaurants. I was building a life, brick by brick, and it was a truly good, full, and self-sufficient life. Last week, 3 years after that catastrophic Thanksgiving, I was sitting at my ergonomic desk, immersed in analyzing a client portfolio, when my personal phone rang. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in forever. "Tina, it's Mom." The voice sounded dry and businesslike, without preamble. "Listen, your great-aunt Dorothy is visiting this weekend. She wants to see the whole family together. You need to be here on Saturday at 6 p.m. sharp for dinner. Don't be late." Great-aunt Dorothy. I could barely recall her features, a vague image of some ancient relative living across the country who in my distant childhood sent birthday cards with $5 tucked inside. "I don't think I can make it," I began, choosing polite but firm words. "I have important plans." "This is not up for discussion, Tina." Her voice became hard as steel. "She specifically asked to see everyone. Don't embarrass us." And without letting me say another word, she hung up. I sat, staring at the darkened phone screen, feeling a boiling mix of indignation and bitter irony inside. The audacity, the unparalleled, stunning audacity of these people. 3 years of absolute radio silence. 3 years of total ignorance of my existence. And now, out of the blue, they want me to show up and perform the Happy Family play for some elderly relative I haven't seen since I was 12. My first, most furious and natural impulse was to completely ignore this absurd ultimatum. But then I started thinking more deeply about how radically my life had changed since that terrible Thanksgiving. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, and I realized the full depth of this new reality. I now had money, real, serious money, providing not just comfort, but serene confidence. I had achieved success they, in their provincial world, couldn't even dream of. And this awareness bred not a desire for reconciliation, but a cold, almost predatory curiosity. I suddenly, to the point of physical tremors, wanted to go. Not because I missed them or cherished hope for renewed relations, but because I craved to see their faces, their eyes, when it slowly but surely began to dawn on them who I had become. I wanted to be a living reproach, embodied proof of their monstrous mistake, to watch them digest the fact that the child they had rejected and whose problems they so diligently disowned now stood at a height none of their precious favorites would ever reach. Aha! The decision matured instantly and irrevocably. I would go to this stupid dinner. It would be fun in its own way. Saturday came faster than I expected. I spent the morning on a thorough, almost strategic selection of my wardrobe. I needed to look impeccable, but not flashy. Elegant, but without ostentatious chic. In the end, I settled on a simple, laconic black dress, tailored by an Italian couturier, an item whose price exceeded someone's monthly rent. I chose equally restrained jewelry, modest pearl earrings that were actually a family heirloom I'd bought at an auction, and a thin platinum necklace. To the untrained eye, I would be just a modestly, tastefully dressed woman. To the knowing one, a walking declaration of impeccable quality and unattainable status. I decided to park my Rolls-Royce not at my parents' house, but in the parking lot of a nearby shopping mall, to walk the last stretch. I wanted to control every moment of this performance, directing my own entrance and dosing the impression. This one-woman theater was my show, and I set the rules myself. Approaching my childhood home evoked a surreal sense of déjà vu. I saw familiar cars parked by the curb, Marcus's practical Honda, Jake's modest Toyota, and I assumed Sarah's boyfriend's beat-up Subaru. All these cars were as mundane as their owners, and my memories of this place. I rang the doorbell like a stranger, which I apparently was. The door was opened by my father, and for a split second, genuine, unconcealed surprise flashed across his face, immediately replaced by the usual, strained mask. "Tina, you came," he said, and his hug was as awkward and cold as our last farewell. Come in. Everyone is so glad to see you." Bullshit. But I just nodded, stepping over the threshold. The living room was filled with nauseatingly familiar smells and people. In the center, in my father's armchair, sat, like an ancient queen on her throne, Great Aunt Dorothy, a tiny, wrinkled woman whose age must have been approaching 90. Marcus was there with his wife Emma, whom I'd seen at most twice, Jake with his girlfriend Melissa, and Sarah with her perpetual boyfriend Derek. "Look who's here," my mother announced, in a tone suggesting my appearance was a complete surprise, not the result of her ultimatum. Great Aunt Dorothy squinted, examining me through thick lenses. "Is that little Tina? My God, how you've grown." We moved to the dining room, and I found myself trapped, wedged between Jake and Sarah at the far, least honorable end of the table, while Aunt Dorothy presided next to my parents. Dinner began, and my parents immediately, as if wound up, began with feigned delight to showcase their offspring's achievements to Aunt Dorothy. Marcus, it turns out, got another promotion at his accounting firm. Jake is about to get a master's degree from some third-rate teacher's college, and Sarah's works, according to my mother, are going to be exhibited in some local gallery. "We are so proud of all our children," my mother concluded breathlessly, addressing Dorothy. "They've all done so wonderfully." And then my siblings, feeling the parental blessing, began their usual mean game, making fun of me, covering their barbs with sweet smiles to maintain the appearance of decency. "Tina, I like your dress," Sarah said sweetly, with false sincerity. "It's so simple, very minimalist. I guess that's trendy now, right? Less is more." She was trying to present my outfit as cheap, unaware the joke was on her. This simple dress cost more than several months of her rent. "Thank you," I replied softly, maintaining only a mysterious, serene smile on my face. Yes, sometimes simplicity is the highest form of sophistication. Then, feeling his parents' approval, Jake chimed in, his voice sweet and venomous. "You know, Tina, I noticed you came on foot today." He made a theatrical pause, savoring the moment. "Do you still take the bus everywhere?" He smirked, looking around at the approving faces. "I remember you once asked Marcus for his old car. That was so cute and naive of you." Marcus also burst into a smug chuckle, picking up the baton of humiliation. "Yeah, right. And Mom and Dad said you could ride the bus like other normal students. Builds character, right?" All of them, including my parents who were smiling indulgently, found this story incredibly amusing, as if there was nothing wrong with depriving me of basic convenience while buying Marcus a new car. I, however, continued to maintain the same light, unassailable smile and ate my meatloaf unhurriedly. But deep down, it was I who was laughing at them now, watching how pathetic and limited they all fundamentally were. They were still stuck in the same house, with the same petty ambitions and meager achievements, the same wretched mindset, and their only entertainment remained mocking an event from 7 years ago, as if time had stopped for them. Great Aunt Dorothy, who had been silently observing until now, carefully absorbing every remark and intonation, finally turned to me, her aged but piercing gaze fixed on me over her glasses. "Tina, dear," she said, and her raspy voice cut through the idle chatter. "I've noticed that everyone here only talks about your brothers and sister, but no one has bothered to mention what you do. Won't you tell an old woman what you do for a living?" A silence so instant and deafening fell over the table that you could hear a drip from the kitchen somewhere. I felt all eyes on me and paused briefly, savoring the moment. "I work for an investment firm," I replied softly, deliberately downplaying it. "At Goldman Sachs." The ensuing silence was a truly beautiful symphony. I watched my father's face slowly change as he processed those two words. His eyebrows crept upward, and his jaw slackened slightly. My mother's fork, carrying a piece of potato, froze halfway to her mouth. Marcus, Jake, and Sarah looked utterly bewildered, their smirks frozen and slowly slipping from their faces, replaced by expressions of stupid bewilderment. They resembled fish washed ashore. "Goldman Sachs," Great Aunt Dorothy repeated slowly, with obvious approval, nodding her gray head. "Well, dear, now that is an achievement. You must be doing more than well." "I'm doing fine," I confirmed modestly, taking a sip of water. "I can't complain." The remainder of the dinner passed in an atmosphere of eerie, oppressive awkwardness. My brothers and sister didn't know how to continue their usual game of mockery, and their attempts at small talk sounded false and broken. My parents just exchanged glances, and in their eyes one could read confusion and a new, wary respect. Great Aunt Dorothy, ignoring the general discomfort, continued to ask me smart, insightful questions about my work, and it was clear she was genuinely interested and impressed. She, unlike the others, was a woman with a sharp mind. After dinner, as in the old days, I helped clear the table, but felt completely different. The executioner had suddenly become the guest of honor. The dynamic had irreversibly changed. No one looked at me as the family outcast anymore. All the glances I caught were filled with an attempt to comprehend, reassess, understand what exactly had changed in the one they considered the eternal outsider. "Well, Great Aunt Dorothy," I said, rising gracefully and glancing at the thin watch on my wrist, "it's been simply wonderful, but I'm afraid I have to go. I have an early morning tomorrow." "Of course, dear," she replied warmly, squeezing my hand. "It was lovely to see you again. You must come visit me sometime. All right?" My parents immediately jumped up, as if on command. "We'll see you out," my mother exclaimed briskly, with excessive energy. "Get some fresh air." Of course, see me out. They needed to maintain the appearance of a happy, united family until the very end, the last second. And so, the whole team poured out after me onto the street. My parents, Marcus with Emma, Jake with Melissa, Sarah with Derek. They continued to chatter and laugh strainedly, probably anticipating me walking down the sidewalk towards the bus stop so they could have one last private laugh at loser Tina. Instead, I walked with a confident, firm step across the road, towards the place where I had parked my car earlier. The silence that fell over the entire group as I approached the gleaming body of the Rolls-Royce was absolute, tomb-like. I pressed the key fob, and the quiet, velvety sound of the locks opening, more like a sigh than a beep, echoed through the sleeping streets of their quiet, unremarkable neighborhood. I got into the cabin, upholstered in the softest leather, and turned the ignition key. The engine responded with an almost inaudible, powerful hum, a vibration that spoke of hidden might. Slowly, like a ship sailing away from an insignificant shore, I drove to where they were still standing on the lawn, turned into a group of stunned statues. I lowered the tinted window. My father just stood there with his mouth silently agape, his eyes bulging, staring at the radiator grill. He seemed to be performing complex calculations in his head. Finally, he managed to exhale, and his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. This car costs no less than—" He didn't dare say the figure aloud, afraid of being wrong. $250,000, I finished softly for him. My mother literally gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Sarah turned so pale that even her bright lipstick couldn't hide the deathly pallor of her skin. Marcus and Jake looked at the car with a delightful, intoxicating mixture of absolute shock and unconcealed animalistic envy. Their eyes slid over the flawless lines of the body, absorbing every highlight on the lacquer. I smiled at them all, a light, serene smile full of calm triumph. "Oh, this old thing?" I said, casually stroking the steering wheel. "It's nothing compared to the view from my apartment in the city center." The expressions on their faces in that moment, when it finally dawned on them that I owned not only a $250,000 car, but also real estate in the heart of the metropolis, were truly priceless works of art. They all stood there, pale, immobilized, and utterly silent, as if struck by lightning. I smoothly raised the window, cutting myself off from this silent movie, and drove off, casting one last look at their frozen figures in the rearview mirror. They were still standing there, like a group of spat-upon monuments, watching me with eyes full of a silent question and the realization of their own insignificance. It was the best Saturday evening in many long years. On Sunday morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly light and amazing. I made myself an exquisite breakfast with avocado and salmon, put on expensive, perfectly fitting running gear, and went to Central Park for my usual weekend run. The weather was perfect, the sun warm, and I was still on a pleasant high from the sweet triumph of the previous evening. About halfway through the run, when I had found my rhythm, my phone in the special shoulder pocket started vibrating and ringing furiously. First Mom, then, almost without a pause, Dad, then Marcus, then Jake, and finally Sarah. Call after call, insistent, almost panicked. I ignored every one, not breaking my breath, and kept running, feeling the connection to the past weaken with every step. After the run, pleasantly tired, I treated myself to a luxurious brunch at a cute but expensive cafe on Fifth Avenue, right by the park. That's when I finally pulled out my phone. 23 missed calls and about 15 messages, all from family. The messages were simply hilarious in their sudden, pathetic change of tone. Suddenly, everyone had become incredibly polite, almost obsequious, and incredibly interested in reconnecting. Mom, Tina, honey, we should meet up soon and have a proper chat. I'd love to see your apartment. Sarah, hey sis, I was thinking we should see each other more often. Maybe go shopping sometime? I'd love to see your apartment. She mentioned the apartment twice, like a mantra. Marcus, hey Tina, it was great seeing you last night. We should have lunch soon and talk about your work. Very impressive. Jake, Tina, God, I had no idea you were doing so well. We should definitely stay in touch. Get coffee sometime. Even Dad wrote, and his message was a masterpiece of hypocrisy. Tina, your mother and I are very proud of you. We should have another family dinner soon. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I ordered another cup of coffee and watched the people passing by with serene pleasure, feeling for the first time in my adult life completely free from this family crap, their toxicity and conventions. 2 weeks passed. The calls and messages continued, and with each time, their tone became more insistent and desperate. Mom started leaving me long voice messages, breathlessly talking about how much they all missed me and how they always knew I was special. Marcus, forgetting his accounting arrogance, started talking about family investments and humbly asking for financial advice. Sarah, dropping the sarcasm, suggested we go somewhere expensive, just us sisters. I deleted everything without dignifying it with a response, and each such act was a new breath of freedom. And then, one evening, leaving work for my tiered parking garage, I saw two painfully familiar figures hesitantly standing near the door of my Rolls-Royce. My parents. Tina, my mother called out, stepping forward, her voice a familiar mix of hope and reproach. We've been waiting for you. I slowly exhaled, feeling my stomach clench for a moment, but then regained my calm. Fine, I said, gesturing with my chin towards the exit. There's a coffee shop across the street. We can talk there. We walked in silence to a small but cozy cafe with subdued lighting and the smell of fresh pastries. The atmosphere was deliberately calm, sharply contrasting the storm raging inside me. I ordered my usual latte with syrup, displaying a nonchalance I didn't feel. They, after a moment's hesitation, ordered plain black coffee, as if even this small expense was now significant for them. We settled at a corner table, lost in the semi-darkness, and I, leaning back in my chair, waited, hands folded in my lap, for them to dare to begin their well-prepared monologue. Tina, my mother began, and her voice sounded saccharine and uncertain. We want you to know how proud we are of you. She paused, expecting a reaction, but receiving none, continued. You've always been so independent, so driven. We always knew you'd achieve something. I almost laughed out loud, but restrained myself, only shaking my head slightly. We made some mistakes when you were younger, my mother picked up, her words flowing like a rehearsed mantra. We understand that now, and we want to make things right. We want you to be part of the family again. I just sat and waited, patiently, like a predator, knowing the real reason for their visit was about to surface. The thing is, my mother continued, lowering her voice to a confidential whisper, Marcus is preparing to propose to Emma, and they want a truly lavish, beautiful wedding. She looked at my father, and he, grunting, joined in. And Sarah and Derek have been together for 3 years, so they'll probably get engaged soon too. So there. Mom nodded, her eyes shining. Weddings are very expensive, my father sighed, avoiding my gaze. And since you're doing so well financially, we thought you might help. You know, he spread his hands helplessly, somehow reconnect with the family. Help how? I asked softly, though I understood perfectly well where this was going. Well, if you could contribute to the wedding expenses, my mother said quickly, as if afraid of being interrupted, it would really help Marcus and Sarah start their new lives and their marriages and show that you want to be part of this family again. I looked at them for a long time, shifting my gaze from her pleading face to his embarrassed one. And then I laughed. For real. Loudly, ironically, so that people at other tables started turning and looking at us curiously. Let's get this straight, I said when the laughter finally subsided and my voice held steel. You want me to pay for Marcus's and Sarah's weddings so that I can return to the family that kicked me out, ignored me for 3 years, and paid no attention to my success until they found out I have money? My parents looked embarrassed. It's not like that, Tina, my father attempted to object. That's exactly what it's like, I cut him off, standing up. The chair scraped back loudly. You know what's the funniest thing? You keep saying you always knew I would succeed. But if that were true, you would have treated me better when I was growing up. You would have supported me the same way you supported Marcus, Jake, and Sarah. You would have invited me to family dinners, not let me eat Chinese takeout alone on holidays. Tears welled up in my mother's eyes. But now they were tears of failure, not repentance. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. No, I said quietly, but very clearly. You can't, because I don't want to fix it. I spent my whole life trying to earn the love of people who never intended to give it to me. I've had enough. I took my bag, put a bill on the table to pay for my latte, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. Over the next few months, they tried calling a few more times, their messages becoming shorter and more hopeless. But in the end, they gave up. Aunt Linda later told me that Marcus did get married, and apparently the wedding was quite modest, without any frills. I, meanwhile, continued to work, build my life, travel the world discovering new countries. I got another promotion and finally moved into a corner office with a panoramic city view. I started dating a guy named David, who works in tech and values my independence and success, rather than seeing them as a threat. Sometimes people ask me if I miss my family. The answer is no. And that's not a cruel truth, just a statement of fact. You can't miss what you never truly had. My so-called family never considered me a person worthy of unconditional love. To them, I was either a burden to be endured or a bank account, depending on my current status. I am 30 now. I live in a beautiful, bright apartment in Manhattan. I drive a car most people only dream of. And most importantly, I am surrounded by people who genuinely like me for who I am, without any conditions. I no longer need approval from those who abandoned me at their convenience.